Hey, friends, welcome to Dishing on Divorce Tuesday edition on WGSN-DB, Going Podcasts and TV. I'm your host, Lisa Lisser, CEO and founder of LZL Coaching, a boutique coaching firm focused on divorce, relationships, and life transitions. I'm also a divorced mom of three now grown kids, a recovering lawyer, a nonprofit leader, a Jewish educator and spiritual counselor, and a divorce coach who is committed to transforming the divorce experience for everyone involved. One of the biggest concerns people have when considering whether to even begin the divorce process is the kids. People often stay in bad marriages for the kids. But what does that really mean? Kids understand more than we think. And when we're okay as parents, they're better too. One issue that can be challenging, whether you are going through divorce or simply trying to raise well-adjusted kids, is how do I parent for resilience, strength, and self-sufficiency? What guidance do I need? After all, although we need a license to drive a car, we don't need a license to become a parent. And we all know that challenging child-parent dynamics can be a leading factor toward divorce, especially when the parents aren't on the same page about child rearing. My guest today is an expert parenting coach for both married, unmarried, and never married couples. Kate Garzón is a GPS for parents of toddlers. Is the GPS for parents of toddlers through teens. She's a parent educator, a parenting coach, and the founder of Guided Parenting Support, GPS. She empowers parents to solve frustrating behaviors and raise great humans by focusing on relationship building, understanding development, and skill building. In addition to private coaching, Kate is also a speaker, author, a frequent podcast guest, and a creator of engaging and relevant on-demand video classes. Weaving storytelling with the science, Kate offers practical information and strategies for parents and educators. Everyone walks away feeling empowered, confident, and optimistic about their interactions with the children and teens they love. Today's topic is co-parenting is about the kids. Learn to read your kids from the inside out. Welcome, Kate, to Dishing on Divorce.
Thank you, Lisa. It is a pleasure to be here.
It is my pleasure to have you. I think you have so much to offer our audience today because you have what could be called a special sauce, even as the compass rose for people's parenting. We met at a women's networking group, and both of us just lit up when we heard about each other's work and saw the great synergy in our philosophies and our methodology. I'd love you to share your story. What launched you to become a parenting coach?
It's a long story that I will make very short. Immediately before becoming a parenting coach, I had been a Montessori teacher for 18 years, both in Canada and in the US. And I always loved working with parents. There was such joy in seeing parents who were having questions or wondering about things. And, they would come into the classroom and we would have a conversation. And when they left saying things like, I feel so much better. I don't feel like I'm failing. I feel like I can do this, or I'm already doing a good job. And so prior to that, I had quite a bit of education and experience working with kids and families of all different types. So over time, I sort of became the person that friends would call, or friends of friends would call, or family members would call. And they'd say, like, my kid's doing this thing, or I can't get them out of the house in the morning. Can you help? And so, when it came time to think about a second chapter in my career, parent coaching was a natural fit. So, and it happened to coincide just at the beginning of the pandemic was when I was launching my business. So parents needed help, and it was one of the ways in which the pandemic was actually a positive.
Yeah, and really, it was a positive because it made the space for your work so obvious.
Yes.
Right? Because so often we fight what we know we need because we don't want people to think we need that kind of help.
Absolutely.
And we feel very vulnerable. But during the pandemic, choices were limited.
Yeah. And everyone was vulnerable,
Yeah.
and we were allowed to be. And I think that that also freed up energy for folks to put some time in to making some changes in their families that would benefit their kids for their whole lives.
Wow. So there's a lot there. What did you see come up like that was maybe particular to the pandemic? And I may be going a little bit off our
That's
topic, but I'm
okay.
really
It's
curious.
all related. It's all related. Yeah. So initially, when folks started coming, it was because parents were working from home in a lot of cases and realizing they were seeing behaviors in their children that they had not noticed prior, or maybe that they only dealt with for an hour after, dinner before bed. And suddenly it was 24/7. And we didn't have, even though villages are fairly limited in North America anyway, it's not a system that's well designed to support parents and children. The limited villages people had were gone. You couldn't call a babysitter in. You couldn't have someone take your kids for an afternoon. A grandparent couldn't come, particularly because we were protecting the elderly population so much. So it really laid bare a lot of the stressors, and everyone's nervous system and body budget was stretched really thin. So parents were realizing that how they were responding to their kids' maybe typical behaviors wasn't a way that felt good for them. And they wanted some support in working through that.
So what you're sharing is that the triggers that maybe you could take space from in another environment were just layering on top of each other,
That's,
because when we were in the pandemic, there was no other time. There was no place to walk away. All of a
yeah,
sudden, that a house that may never have been an office before and was certainly not a school
yeah,
was both of those things at the same time. And so
absolutely.
that pressure sort of needed release of steam, and you were the answer to that, head exploding steam building
It
problem, right?
it was I helped. Yes, I helped, but, it was a wild time for lots of people and a very difficult time for a lot of reasons. But it did allow me the opportunity to get into many more workplaces
Mm,
virtually than would have been opened up otherwise. Companies were very interested in bringing someone in to support their employee parents,
mhm.
and that was something that had not happened before
Yeah.
and has sort of, trickled off since. But it did it also created communities of parents within workplaces, realizing that, maybe we're not that different. And that face you put on when you show up at work is, that mask is gone when your children are running around behind you while you're
Right,
trying to work.
right. And it's really like, it's so interesting because it's like we all have different roles in different parts of our lives. So when we're in our houses, we have maybe the parent role on. But when we
Mhm.
walk into the office, we take off that jacket, we put on a different shirt, and now we are in the role of employee, worker, designer, creator. But it's a different role. And so what we present is different. And when those worlds collide, it's very hard to find the seams,
Mhm.
because it all blends together. And I think that's was so frustrating at the time for parents, because they needed a clear runway and all they got was rubble in front of them.
Mhm. It
And
was it was really tough for the kids too, because kids do the same thing, right? They are one way with their friends and a different way with their teachers and a different way with their grown-ups, their safest people.
Mhm,
And so all of a sudden, all of that was mashed together. And so parents were seeing a mixture of things that they maybe hadn't seen before, or they'd be listening to their kid on FaceTime with a friend speaking in a way that upset them, but it was truly just like the way seventh graders talk to each other,
yeah,
things that the grown-ups aren't supposed to hear because kids are figuring out who they are separately from their grown-ups. So it was equally challenging for everyone.
yeah. So and that leads into my next question, which is about storytelling. Because
Mm,
in your bio, you say that you weave together storytelling with science.
mm,
And I am all about the stories we tell ourselves about
absolutely.
ourselves and what our expectations are of that story. So tell us a little bit more about this storytelling and how you weave it with the science for parents who are struggling.
The storytelling piece comes in partly through anecdotes that I share, de-identified anecdotes that I share, so that parents realize they're not alone. And for my own business purposes, it helps provide some credibility. Oh, she's worked with families who experience something like this. One of the things that's important for me for folks to know is that I chose not to have my own children because I've been working for decades with other people's. So I'd seen behind the curtain and I realized that it wasn't a path I wanted to take, but I've devoted my career to supporting other people's children and families. And so when families are coming to me and sharing their story, it's not being filtered through my own story. And that's hugely important for parents to understand. When they come to me, sometimes they're sharing a story. The story they're telling themselves is that they're failing as a parent. Sometimes they're sharing the story they're telling themselves is that they're in fact doing everything right as a parent and their child is the problem, right? Sometimes they come to me and everything just feels off, but they can't actually find a narrative for it. They just need a place to dump it all. All of those stories, sometimes, related to co-parenting, the story they're telling themselves is that everything would be fine if this other person would change. So all of these things are connected. And so they come to me with their story and I listen to it, taking it at face value, because their perspective, even if their story is not factually accurate, because everyone comes with their own perspective, it is their story and it matters that I meet them where they are. And then I filter that through the stories of the thousands of kids and families that I've worked with, not through the story of how I chose to parent my own one or two or three, non-existent humans. So it gives them compassion, it gives them no judgment, and it gives them a space to share that story. When I'm in a setting where I'm doing a workshop or, a podcast or group coaching, then I share more stories of other parents, because the work I do is rooted in science. It's rooted in child development, interpersonal neurobiology, polyvagal theory, Adlerian psychology, collaborative and proactive solutions, all of these evidence-based things. But unless that's connected to a human, then there's no value in it for the parents. And all of these things are out there, but the gift that I give to parents is I'm going to distill down what's essential for you and your humans, rather than you having to sift through everything that's out there to try to figure out what is so hard, for you and your kids.
Right. And so that's the synergy that we both share. Like my role as divorce coach is to help find the path through all of the overwhelm, all of the noise, all of the science. What do I read? Which self-help book? Which science journal? Which divorce support book do I read? And I help them sift through it to find what's right for them and their family.
Exactly.
And that's what you're doing. And so many people are most vulnerable in their identity as parent. And so they don't know how to ask for help.
Absolutely. And it's even harder, when your marriage or your romantic partnership is dissolving. It puts everything on shaky ground. And it really does impact your body budget. It impacts how much resilience your nervous system has in reserve. And it impacts your ability to attune to your kids and to respond to everything that they're going through. So, having an extra person, I don't work exclusively with co-parenting. I work with all the parents. But when it is a co-parenting situation, and sometimes that's not even families who were together and are no longer together. Sometimes it's people who were never together and chose to have a child or adopt a child. Sometimes it's families where there are additional caregivers, right? A live-in nanny, a grandparent, a much older sibling. Anyone who's in that parenting role is welcome in our sessions.
Yeah.
In order to support the kiddos.
And what is so remarkable about that is what you highlight is that there really is no leave it to beaver family. right? There's no Brady Bunch.
No,
It's
there is
not,
not.
no one has the perfect dynamic, but everyone seems to think that something better is going on in someone else's house. And
Absolutely.
so that's the self-judgment and the story we're telling ourselves.
Yeah.
And, 30 years ago, when I was practicing, when I was a law student,
Mhm.
I was really curious about the structure of families. And I wrote an article in favor of gay marriage back in 1990.
Mhm.
But what I learned from my research was that though we think every family looks the same, no family really looks the same.
Absolutely not.
And yet we deal with similar issues, but we have different contexts.
Mhm.
So there's nothing that is absolute, and that's another thing I share with my clients. There are no absolutes. There is a practice and maybe a better practice,
Yes.
and to take the shame and the blame out. So how do you do that with parents? Because I'm sure when they come to you, they're insecure, they're frustrated, they don't know what they're doing wrong, but they know it's just not working.
Yeah, something isn't going well. And sometimes they come proactively. They know there's a life change about to happen and they want to support their kids' resilience as best as possible, or even know how to talk to their kids about,
Mhm.
what's going on. You know, children are never, ever, ever the cause of divorce. However, often there are sort of cracks beneath the surface in a family that don't show up until you have smaller humans in the household.
Yeah.
Right? Differences in values, differences in communication styles, the things we carry with us, our inner child comes along with us and brings all those souvenirs from how we were raised and all of that.
Mhm.
So the baseline that I always start with is that every single parent, caregiver who shows up in my space is doing the very best they can
Mhm.
with the resources that they have, with the nervous system that they have, and with how they were parented. And so if we start with that baseline, and then the other piece is every single parent that I have ever encountered just wants to raise a good human. And they have very different ways of doing that. Some are ingrained in the only way to raise a good human is to punish, punish, punish. Some, and usually they came from very harsh circumstances. And so it comes from a place of worry and fear. Others, their goals are different and their approaches are different, and they're doing it in a way that's very permissive, right? There's all sorts of different parenting styles out there. So my approach is parenting style agnostic, and it's
Okay.
also kind of behavior agnostic. It doesn't really matter what a parent is coming with. The process that we work through, the roadmap that we take, focuses on giving them that place to unload everything. It focuses on building and protecting relationships. It focuses on a really solid understanding of child development. That's one of the things that I bring to the table, helping them understand what characteristics their humans have, their age, their developmental stage, their neurodiversity, their temperament, all of those things. And then so they can scale their expectations
Right.
accordingly.
Right.
And then I look at skill building, because every single parent wants to raise a kid who is accountable and responsible and can manage their time and problem solve and has emotional self-regulation and impulse control and frustration tolerance and all of these things,
Wow,
right?
that's a lot for a
These
kid
are right. And these are sort of the things that grown-ups want their kids to have. And all of those things are skills, and in order to build those skills, kids need to have a brain that is mature enough. So they have to be in the right developmental stage.
Right.
They also have to have a nervous system that is regulated enough for them to access those skills and to learn. And then they need practice and practice and practice and practice and practice
Right.
at doing the thing that they should do instead. The really interesting thing is that the parents who come to me also need to build their skills for frustration tolerance,
Mhm.
for impulse control, for, giving grace, being patient. Many of the things that they come to me frustrated about their children, particularly if it's a biological child, it's just the same stuff they were doing at that age. And
Yeah.
they hadn't had 40 years to take the edge off.
Exactly. And so on that note about the 40 years to take the edge off,
Mhm.
we're going to take a short 30-second break for a word from our sponsors, and then we'll be back with Kate Garzón, guided parenting support. And we're back with Kate Garzón of Guided Parenting Support, GPS. Kate has been talking with us about how she supports parents when they are experiencing frustration and behavior issues and emotional regulation issues with their small humans. And Kate has an expertise in how to guide parents toward the right tools. We just ended on how do parents build the skills to address their specific human who has different characteristics than they did, or maybe has exactly the same characteristics they did, but they just can't see it. And so they're living in a world where the story they tell themselves is that they have to do it this way because that's what my parents did, or I
Mhm.
will not do it that way because that's the way my parents did it. And these are all stories that we tell about how we're going to do this holy work, but it may not be looking at the person or people who are right in front of us.
Yeah.
So, Kate, how do you get parents to focus on their particular child and their unique gifts and challenges?
So one of the ways that I do that is providing a background for the parents in child development, but we narrow it specifically to the ages and stages of the kids that they have. So if they've got littles, we're not talking about adolescent development, right? If they've got adolescents, we're not getting into some of the early years stuff. But the key pieces and the aha moments for parents are when we talk about how the brain develops in terms of sort of a downstairs brain and an upstairs brain, right? The downstairs brain being the parts that you're born with, the autonomic nervous system, your reflexes, the things that keep you alive without thinking about it. Those are also the things that send us into fight or flight, right? And babies are born having that fully developed, but none of the upstairs brain to regulate any of it.
Mhm.
So kids are born with all of the sensations that we then call emotions once we give context to them. They're born with all of those sensations and none of the skills. So when parents start having a better understanding of the progression of what they can reasonably expect from their child, that's a big aha moment because they oftentimes realize it's a mismatch between what their child is actually capable of and what they're expecting. But then the other really big piece is we talk about body budgets, which is very quickly, it's how your brain predicts what's going to happen and then allocates resources accordingly. So if you're, it's a really cool concept. I did not, I'm not the researcher behind this. It's a neuroscientist called Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett. She's a psychologist and a neuroscientist, and she's incredible. And I am simplifying it. If she ever listens to this, she will be mortified at how I'm describing it. But the way that it applies to families is everybody has a body budget. And your sensory profile, how the world lands on you, it's different for everyone. Some people are really sensory seeking, some are sensory avoidant, right? For kids who have, a challenging sensory profile, they may need, tons of vestibular input, lots of being tossed around and pushing heavy things and jumping up and down. And for other kids, that's the last thing that feels good for them. Everybody's different. And so when parents understand each other's body budgets and their kids' body budgets, then we can start figuring out, how do we boost those body budgets in ways that benefit the whole household? Things like sleep, play, fresh air, joyful movement, laughter, connection, affection, all of these things and again, it's slightly different for everyone, but across the board, we know fresh air is good for people and we're not getting enough of it, right? Sleep is good for people. We're not getting enough of it. Those kinds of things. And then I teach parents specifically with your kids in your routine and structure and with your resources, what are some really concrete ways that you can boost body budgets built right into your routines, right? Because that improves the resilience for the whole household.
Right.
So, and that body budget stuff is when these aha moments, it's like these light bulbs going off for parents. You know, we get into some polyvagal theory and just really basic stuff that helps them understand why they respond to people the way they do.
Can you do a little deeper on that? What is polyvagal theory for my audience who aren't familiar with that term?
So again, it's Dr. Stephen Porges, who is an incredible researcher, and I will not do him justice, but essentially the vagus nerve that runs essentially from the top of your head all the way down through your gut controls your parasympathetic nervous system. And it's the thing that, you know, when you get the feeling of like butterflies in your stomach or like a pit in your stomach.
Yeah.
The vagus nerve, right? Your nervous system takes information in from the environment and sends it up to your brain and then starts releasing resources, or it takes stuff from your brain and sends it out to get to make your body do stuff. And so, you know, digestion and motor movements, breathing, heart rate, you know, all of those things are controlled by our nervous system and our brain. And so if you grow up and you have parents who don't know any of this stuff, and let's say you have a parent who's very controlling and it's a very reward punish household, you know, you get used to squashing how you feel out of fear of punishment. So you don't learn to process the whole range of human sensations and emotions because you are so afraid of being punished if you cry, if you share how you're feeling, if you don't want to do something because it makes you uncomfortable. Your nervous system gets used to living in that really disconnected state.
Right.
And that, you know, when chaos feels normal, stability feels boring.
Right.
Or stability feels almost painful.
Right.
So all the stuff we encounter, it lives in our bodies through our whole lives, unless we process it and unless we learn to sort of take it in and work with it. So when I'm working with parents, we focus on the kids, we focus on the parenting, but through that process, they start to learn more about themselves.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So, and what I'm hearing, because in my coach training, we did discuss polyvagal theory, and we talked about the amygdala and fight or flight and how we are adults, so we can start practicing skills so that our prefrontal cortex recognizes when it's time to kick in. Because when our amygdala, our polyvagal system, is going on auto drive, then we don't have the bandwidth. Like, that's a term that some of us are familiar with. We don't have the bandwidth to slow down.
Yeah.
And so just the step of saying, you notice when something isn't going the way you expect or you would like, and pause. Just that pause can be enough to give the adult, the co-parent, the divorcing spouse, a space to breathe. Absolutely. So they can think and respond rather than react.
Absolutely.
And that's what you're suggesting, as I understand it, for parents when feeling frustrating behaviors and their amygdala starts going.
Your child starts to seem like a saber-toothed tiger. Yes.
Then, rather than reacting, notice the feeling
and create a gap. Create a gap between the stimulus and the response. And, you know, one of the things that's really interesting about body budgets is the predictive factor. And that's what separates it. There are lots of things that separate it, but one of the big things in practice is so let's say a parent and an adolescent have been having difficult interactions several days in a row. When it's time to come home from school, that adolescent is walking in the door armored up for battle already.
Mhm.
They are anticipating, whether they realize it or not, their brain is anticipating mom's going to be giving me a hard time. And so their body is releasing adrenaline and cortisol as they're walking up the driveway, getting off the bus.
And
And
the parent
yes,
is
the parent is
experiencing
doing the same thing. And then because what we know, the vagus nerve also controls our auditory function. It controls facial muscles. So it helps us discern whether someone is predator or prey, right? There's all sorts of cool things behind it. So you get this kid walking in the door, and the parent with their fully formed upstairs brain is thinking, okay, I'm going to try and do this differently. So they just say, hi, honey, how was your day? And what the kid hears is, how was your day? What did you do wrong? They're interpreting it very differently than how it was meant. So it's often that mismatch again in how the parenting is landing. But once parents understand these body budget things that they can do, and they understand ways to support their child, they can shift, they can take the temperature down in the household by shifting how they speak, how they approach their kids, until their kids have built the skills so that they can then have these kinds of conversations.
And what's interesting in this is how these are building blocks for all of our relationships.
For sure.
Right? Because when we have parents who are in the process of divorce or have completed divorce and they're in high conflict situations, everybody's triggers are going off.
Mm-hmm.
But if they can learn in the context of co-parenting, how to modulate, how to check in with their body budget. What am I feeling right now? Why is my heart racing? Maybe I need to pause. All of a sudden I feel flushed. How come the back of my neck is tingling?
Yeah.
So notice those things. Start building that awareness, that practice of awareness. It's a practice of awareness. And that gives some space before reaction.
Absolutely.
And what you're teaching is, okay, so some of the better reactions involve X, Y, or Z, but not saying, you bad, you should be ashamed, you should not behave that way.
Absolutely.
Like, how dare you say, hey, honey, how was your day?
Yeah, it's really, because the human development focus is a big part of the coaching work and the education piece. Many coaches are sort of trained to, you just ask questions and you just guide, you just lead them. And I understand that there are elements of that, but the biggest piece is once they have a better understanding of their kids and therefore themselves, they can set limits and boundaries that are actually realistic for the humans they have. They can learn to collaborate. And this is especially important if a child is going back and forth to different homes, right? Not just collaborating. Sometimes it's not possible to collaborate with your co-parent. Sometimes there really is a big separation. So collaborating with the child or the teenager so that they have some autonomy, they have some feelings of power and control, and they can be a real partner in how to move through the various situations, between households or between school and home. It's really important.
It's really important. And it's something that I'm sure is overlooked a lot. Like the idea of giving your child who may be having behavior issues some agency in decision making may seem antithetical to you as a parent having to lay down the law. But, one of the things I teach in my co-parenting work is, step into the shoes of, like, what is your child's perspective? And how can you learn to appreciate that perspective is authentically theirs?
Absolutely.
And recognize that, you know what? It's time for me to shift. Right? We can do that. And when we care so much about our kids, that doing that for the benefit of our kids can become our GPS.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Because we know from decades of research that really strict authoritarian approaches They may look like they're working in the short term. Those might be the kids who, when they're out and about, people say, oh, your children are so well behaved. My goodness, they're little angels. But we know the outcomes of that, and those outcomes include some of the really scary stuff like self-harm and eating disorders and anxiety disorders and depression, substance abuse, early and risky sexual activity.
Right.
The kind of the best case scenario in that circumstance is where they just sort of bide their time until they're 18 and can leave the house and do their own thing. Yeah. That's kind of the best you can hope for in those really, really strict approaches. And often I've had families say to me, well, I was raised in that environment and I turned out totally fine. And I say, okay, let's start there. How's your relationship with your parents now? Oh God, I only see them at Christmas and Easter. I live in a different state than them and I have no desire to see them more often. No, they're not involved. I don't want them near my kids. They're too harsh. Right? I hear that, and then they hear themselves and they go, oh, wait. Oh, yeah. maybe we should make some changes.
Right. Because then you can say, so how would you like to see your relationship with your child in 5 years, in 10 years?
Exactly.
And what do you want them to learn from how you navigated a difficult situation? And that's also part of what I share with parents in co-parenting, is that when you learn how to work collaboratively with your co-parent, as opposed to in conflict, there are some co-parenting couples that want to prove the other is the bad parent.
Yes.
And, bad parent. And so they sabotage each other and not really thinking about what's really happening for the child because they're so invested in the story of their struggle.
Yes.
For the best interest of the child. But what I try to do, what my technique, my BEH2O, we try to flip that so that they recognize that their behaviors may not be serving the values they wish to instill in their child. And what you're sharing here, which is for all of us, whether we are divorced or not, and actually parents or not, is that when you see people where they are and hold on to that knowledge that not everyone is in the same place that you are.
Right.
How can we work to get what I need and what you need in a way that yields the least stress?
Yeah, we're looking for the win-win, and the win-win is healthy kids, who grow up with regulated nervous systems and who have the skills to move through the world and manage all of the unknowns. Because that's really the only guarantee in parenting, is that the future is unknown. Yes. And if you can prepare your kids to be successful in that unknown future, then you've done your job.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much. This was huge. I think your vision and perspective are so powerful. How can my audience get in touch with you?
They can go to my website, which is guidedparentingsupport.com. And from there, they will find access to my email and my socials, my YouTube channel. I think I have 130 little videos up, just short little video snippets. I call them Tuesday tips. And so they can start at guidedparentingsupport.com. And from there, everything opens up to them.
The world is open. So it's really like you kind of are opening a window to a whole new perspective. Yes, that's what we're talking about.
That is the hope.
And that's guided parenting support. I often think about the father, the dad, the male in the car who is lost and just refuses to ask someone. This is before GPS. Like, yes. I am not going to ask for directions.
I will pull over and open the map.
But we do need a direction and a guide. Yeah. And when we are strong enough to ask for that help, we really can see so much success and so many shifts and changes in our children, our relationship with their children, and our relationship with each other. So Thank you so much, Kate. And
thank you, Lisa.
I welcome the opportunity to maybe have you back and we can talk more about specific situations.
I would love that. We can dive into all the things.
All the things. So for my audience, thank you for tuning in. I'm Lisa Lisser, founder of lzlcoaching.com, and you can find me there. or email me, lisa@lzlcoaching.com. Until next time, this is Lisa Lisser on Dishing on Divorce.